Starliner Media. Starliner Media presents Music Night at the Majestic with your host, Michael Boswell.
All right, it's time once again for Music Night at the Majestic, and with us, Steve Berlin. Steve, welcome to the show.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
Well, you say that now, Steve. We'll see how you feel when this thing's done.
All right, well. Do we have a safe word or anything like that?
If I see you flashing any hand signals, I'll know that,
right.
you want out.
Fair enough.
Now, was it my introduction to you was back in 81 when a friend of mine, brought me the Blasters album and says, you got to listen to this. This is your thing. And the first track he played, although it wasn't the first song on the album, was I'm Shakin' with your horn, your sax, baritone sax intro on that. So tell me this. How does a kid from Philly wind up in the LA music scene?
Well, you just buy a ticket and head west. It wasn't really not much mystery to that part of it. I had left Philly in the 70s. Pretty much, I don't know. It wasn't a whole lot going on when I left, and I had some good friends that had moved about 6 months prior from Philly to LA, and they were they were killing it. It was a band. There was a group called the Soul Survivors who had a big hit called Expressway to Your Heart. And they were buddies. I wasn't in the band, but they were good friends of mine. We used to hang out and jam, and they were just my pals. And they left en masse, minus the singer. So it wasn't like the band, the full band left. It was just the rhythm section, basically bass, drums, guitar. And they moved to LA, and in short order, they were backing up both Billy Preston and Greg Allman, which was sort of amazing for a bunch of guys from Philly. So they called me and said, you got to come out here. It's easy pickings. And within 2 weeks of my arrival, they lost both gigs. I don't know if I had anything to do with that, but it just happened. So we decided we were going to put a band together, and we did. So I did that for a couple of years. This was like well before anything was going on in the quote unquote LA scene. This would be 76, 77. It was, the scene was stirring, but there was nothing, there was no Mask. There was none of the primordial ooze had coalesced into a life form quite as yet. But I was, kind of learning my way and playing a lot, and sort of, it was a more or less it was kind of a fun time to be in LA. It wasn't, the city hadn't really exploded yet. It was relatively inexpensive to live. So I was kind of having a ball, really. So the band that band made a record on Casablanca Records, which was noted for, among other things, being basically just a cocaine marketplace, which it basically was, masquerading as a record label. But it was fascinating. It was, I was on a record label, and we made a record, and I had always had an interest in production. And I got to see the producer that the label hired make literally every mistake he could possibly make. He made every choice that he made was wrong. And I was just gobsmacked that, this guy that the label, or I guess we were, but the label was paying all this money to, could not make a single decision that that made any sense whatsoever. So I just decided, well, my worst day will never be as good as his best day. So that was one thing that I got out of it. But I was much younger than everybody else in that band. I was 5 to 10 years younger. So I was I had my ear elsewhere, and there were things happening in Hollywood that I wanted to be at least investigating, not necessarily thought I'd be part of it. And as that band was kind of falling apart, I was becoming friends with a group of people that included the guys in the Blasters. And so we were all just drinking buddies, basically. I wasn't in the band. I was playing with a bunch of other bands. at the time. And I had done a record well before the Blasters with a band called the Flesh Eaters, which was Dave and Bill from the Blasters, John and Don from X, and a singer named Chris D. So this would have been 79, I think, or 80. So I got to know them, and they heard me play, and it sort of was it wasn't like it was a cold call when Dave called and asked if I wanted to play on I'm Shakin'. So I knew them and they knew me, and then I was working at a music store, and this was before cell phones even, and the phone rang at the music store, and it was Dave Alvin saying, "Hey, what are you doing tonight? Do you have a baritone? Would you like to come play?" And I did not have a baritone, but there happened to be one at the music store. So I grabbed it and went to the session, and there I was. So I was, I was sort of on the periphery of this thing that was sort of just developing. I was certainly a fan of the Blasters. They were kind of like I don't know, I guess kind of like my heroes, like X, those bands. I mean, they were that as that scene was forming, those guys were at the top of that food chain, and it was I was amazed that they would call me and think of me to come play. So I went down there. It was Lee Allen, one of my heroes, was also there, and it went well. And they said, "What are you doing tomorrow night?" I said, "Whatever you tell me I'm doing." So I came back and we played another song, and by the end of that week I was in the band, and we were making plans to hit the road, and I was quitting my job at the music store, and that was the last legitimate job that I've ever had.
It's a beautiful thing.
So dreams can come true.
Now, how did you wind up working with Los Lobos and becoming a member?
So I had been in the Blasters roughly 2 years or so at that point, and they were ascending quickly, as they should, because they were an amazing band. And it was a relative high point. We were headlining a weekend at the Whiskey A Go-Go, which was probably in the club scene, that was the top of that pyramid. So we had, I think, 4 nights at the Whiskey, and one of the 4 nights was this band Los Lobos. And I had seen a band called Los Lobos open for Public Image, I believe earlier that year, but it was like they were playing Mexican folk music, which certainly was interesting, opening up for Public Image. So I thought, well, it can't be the same guys, because in that era there were a million bands, and certainly wasn't unusual that a band, a name or something like it was, there were lots of the Accelerators, the Gears, it wasn't outside the realm of possibility that there would be two Los Loboses. But sure enough, it was the same guys, but they had in the interim gotten electric instruments and plugged in, and they were playing rock and roll, and they literally blew, the people say, "Oh, they blew the place away." Well, there was, Los Lobos was, that show that weekend, it was more akin to like an earthquake. It was like it was an extinction level event, because literally anybody talked about the day after they played was Los Lobos. Literally everybody I talked to was like, "Did you see Los Lobos?" And what I came to realize was that in that moment, by that weekend, the band that had been around the longest in the quote unquote scene was roughly 2.5 years old. Blasters, X, Plugs, Weirdos, Screamers. There was like 5 or 6 bands, and all of them had only been together 2 years. And here are these guys that had been together at that point for 7 or 8 years, and they had worked out. They had sort of like this sort of structural integrity that no other band had. There were lots of great bands. I'm not saying that they were better or worse, but they had something that no other band could come close to, because they had literally sweated and played together nonstop for 7 or 8 years. So when they showed up and opened the show, the Whiskey was just like no one had ever heard anything. Well, no one heard anything like them, because there wasn't really any Hispanic representation or much of it in the quote unquote scene. But there was certainly nobody that had this sort of, stylistic complexity and just this sort of richness and depth that you only get from playing together for years and years and years and years. So, it was remarkable, to say the least. And we just started talking. We were just shooting them shit, and hey, what about this? What about this? And they said, some of these songs have sax parts. Do you want to come learn them? And I was like, yeah, sure, why not? So so we made tentative plans to get together, and then so that was Friday, Saturday, and then Sunday on the same weekend, Ornette Coleman was playing in LA, and I was still am huge Ornette Coleman fan. I go to the Ornette Coleman show, and all those guys are there. I'm like, wait a minute, who are these guys? It just sort of like sealed the deal that they would be, playing, Hispanic, Latin rock and roll, and there they are at the Ornette Coleman show. So anyway, we sort of like within the course of 72 hours became effectively best buddies, and I went down to they rehearsed they had a friend named Gary Ibanez who was I think he was a delivery driver for UPS, but he let us use his garage as a rehearsal place. So I went down and I kind of walked in there. I didn't really know what to expect, and they made me feel just utterly, totally welcome. I was not treated as an outsider. I was just sort of like one of the guys, and it just felt great right from the very first moment. And basically, nothing's changed.
Well, you would be hard pressed to find a band that can play as many different styles as what those guys do, and be astute in all of them.
I don't know how you define astute, but we can get away with a lot. That's for sure. We can fake a lot of stuff pretty good.
Well, it's working.
It seems to be.
Well, tell me this, Steve. You play more than just the saxophone. Did you play multiple instruments? Growing up, what instrument did you start playing as a kid?
I started playing flute actually, because I was a big fan of Jethro Tull. That was like my entree into the music world. So I started there, and then I matriculated to soprano sax. I became kind of a jazz snob for a couple minutes there when I was very young. And then the band that I had joined, the band that moved from Philly, we were rehearsing, and they said, if you don't show up, because soprano sax, let's be honest, gets a little annoying. But they didn't throw me out of the band. They didn't threaten to throw me out of the band until a couple of years into it. They said, if you don't show up with a different instrument next rehearsal, you're out of the band. So I got a tenor and started playing that. And then, like I said, I started playing baritone the day that Dave Alvin called and asked if I had a baritone. So started with that. And I'm really not much of a keyboard player, to be honest with you. I play what I call producer keyboards, which is when you produce a lot of records and you can't afford to hire a keyboard player, you just sort of learn just enough facility to execute the parts. But, I can't read anything on keyboards. I can't, I'm basically a one-handed keyboard player, but I can execute what I need to execute, basically.
Well, sometimes that's all you need.
Yeah, I got me this far.
Now, you mentioned before about the production. That's one of the things I wanted to get into with you, producing, because you've produced so many albums. But with you, you have an uncanny knack for making the album sound as though the listener is at a live show for the band. At the same time, it's crisp, it's pristine, sounds excellent, but yet it sounds live. When you go into produce an album, what's your approach?
Well, I try not to have an agenda. I try to be I prepare myself as much as I can. I'm intimately involved with the arranging and the song structure if I need to be. And I have a plan, but I'm 100% ready to change that plan and throw it out the window at a moment's notice if things develop in a different way. So I don't really have a orthodoxy that I apply. I just kind of want to make the records non-boring. I mean, that's really the main thing. And try to create something that hadn't existed prior to the moment of this creation. I mean, I think that's our job. Is like, nothing bores me faster than something that sounds just like something, only not quite as good. So I'm always trying to figure out a different and/or new way to approach something. And I work in a genre for the most part that's kind of all about historical tropes. So I feel like my job is to is to either reharmonize or violate those tropes at every opportunity. And somewhere or another, the records come out. They sound just like the records we're trying not to emulate, but it at least in my heart, I'm trying to do something different.
Well, yeah, to that point, yeah, there's a lot of producers that have a sound, and when you hear it, you can tell that was produced by so and so, or this
Right.
person, or that person, what have you.
Yeah.
With your work, Steve, you stay out of the way of the band. You make the band sound, more like the band, if you will, or they keep their identity, and to me, that's a major plus.
Well, I don't feel like anybody's buying the records because my name is on it. They want to hear what the people I'm working with are doing. So I try to. I mean, I'm not conscious of a footprint. I mean, there's certainly things that I know I like that I tend to go back to when presented with a issue. But I try to be as transparent as possible. My job is really just to make the best record with the tools and the people and the resources at hand. And so, yeah, I'm kind of, I guess if I was proud of anything, I would be proud of the fact that I hope I don't have a footprint or a sound, because nothing will get you fired faster than having a sound. And if things aren't working, it's, you don't have any resources. I mean, I'd like to think that I could, shift it, like I said earlier, like shift on a moment's notice and go a completely different direction if the situation demands it.
Well, given the different types of bands that you've worked with, yeah, I'd say that is evident, because you work with Azamatli, Freshly Ground, Raul.
Raul
I mean, those are what's that?
Raul Malo, yeah, he's
a
force of nature.
Yeah, yes, he is. Well, I'll tell you, talk about Raul on his album Lucky One that you produced. That album has one of my favorite tracks from him, Moonlight Kiss.
Yeah, that record was a ball. So that record had arguably one of the best bands in the world at the time. It was a group of guys so I had done a record called, it was a thing called Los Super 7, which is basically, the first record was it was Los Lobos goes to Austin. So it was, we did it was just like not necessarily a jam session, because everybody came with songs, but it was just like us playing with Freddie Fender and a guy named Ruben Ramos, who is still one of the most amazing people I ever worked with. Joe Ely, some amazing musicians, a guy named Max Baca and another guy named Joel Guzman, who were just incredible players. And we won a Grammy with that record, which is kind of awesome. And then, so we got authorization to do a second one. And the idea for the second one was, if we just took this concept worldwide. So like if we just were able to call, people from all over the world to come and sort of join this little party that we started with the first record. So we had Susana Baca from the Cape Verdean Islands. We had Caetano Veloso from Brazil. Ruben Ramos came back. Joe Ely came back. A guy named Rick Trevino, who I should mention was on the first one, and his manager actually was the guy that actually started. It was his idea to bring me in and bring Lobos in. So Rick was integral in the development. And then we invited Raul to do it, and he was his voice is one of the most amazing instruments in the world. So basically, from that record, I ended up producing almost everybody that played on the record. I ended up making a record with almost everybody that was on that record. So that's where Raul's first solo record came from. And that band was mostly the guys from the second Super 7 record. So it was an incredible piano player named Alberto Salas. These are guys who are kind of like legends in Latin music. So it was Alberto Salas. Machito Sanchez was playing percussion. Who was playing bass? Rene Camacho, guy, he played with Celia Cruz, among others. It was just an unbelievably great band with a young drummer who went on to join my band, a guy named Cougar Estrada, who was also really integral in making the record. And it was really just, the fireworks that happen when you get a voice like Raul's and these unbelievable Latin players. So that record is still one of the most amazing funnest records of my career. Every night was literally a party. Like that's kind of how Raul rolls. Like he's like wherever he is on any given moment, that's the best party in town. So it was just literally. I got used to being able to work with literally a circus going on around me. I just sort of developed this. I don't know. I never had to do it before, but it's come in handy since. But I was just sort of like shut out all this insanity that's literally like 33 feet from my head and focus on the work. I remember there were a couple of points. At one point, I looked over. This has never happened to me before, and my engineer was literally like face down, drooling on the console. he had overindulged, which is easy enough to do when one rolls around. But we had a blast. It was just it was like that. It was just like literally an endless party and great music ensued. So those are the like can't really say that my career's had some hits and misses, but the things that I remember best were the moments like that, just like how much fun we had, and the record sounds like fun. It sounds like a bunch of guys having a ball because we did.
Yeah, well, tell me this on Lucky One, how much of that was simply were recorded live with everybody playing together?
It was pretty live. I don't think I'm not sure if we kept all the live vocals. I think there was some like Raul was he was very he wasn't going to let anything that wasn't amazing out. So I think we might have replaced some of the vocals, but it was largely live. I don't think we did the horns live though. No, those were done afterward. The strings. I mean, it was a big production. I mean, we had everything. We had horns, strings, singers, percussion, armies of percussion. So the basic tracks were cut. It certainly wasn't cut like Pro Tool style where you do one guy at a time and you brick it together and all that crap, which I hate. It was pretty live for the most part.
Yeah, well, see, that's for me another hallmark of your production, where you'll have a lot of times things become muddy. You get a lot of instruments playing at once, but on your albums, even though you may have 10 guys playing, each instrument is distinctive and you can hear it in the mix.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
So
I've certainly been guilty of muddy records, though. I can't say I've gotten off scot-free, but I try to avoid it if I can.
Yeah. Well, tell you, talking about Los Super 7, let's go to the other border where you worked with Prairie Oyster. How did you come to work with those guys?
Wow, you're going all the way back. I was friends with Joan, the keyboardist. She was married to Gene, the keyboardist in the Blasters. So I knew her through that. And I guess I had just co-produced the first couple Lobos records. So I sort of was on their radar, I guess. And I guess Joan was the one that kind of pitched me to the band. And then I met with them and we made a record in, oh golly, what year was that? That was early, man. That was like early 80s. We worked at Daniel Lanois, his first studio. Not, he's come to be well known for his various studios all over the world, but this was a place called Grant Street where he started in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. So that's like not quite a suburb of Toronto. It's like halfway between like Toronto and Buffalo, I guess. And that was interesting. I had never, that was like, I really didn't know what I was doing, to be honest with you. I had produced at that point in my career, that was like the third or fourth record I'd ever made. So I was still, pretty green, but they were great. The songs were great. The band was great. I learned a lot just being there. Like Daniel wasn't around, but they had a great engineer, a guy named Bob Deutsch, who certainly helped me out. I mean, because like I said, I really didn't know what I was doing, but everybody was very, they were patient and it worked. It was, we had a lot of fun. That was a neat record to make. And it went on to win a bunch of awards in Canada. And yeah, it was, I really, really enjoy going there. Like I've had some really, really fun times, made some really, I think impactful records in Canada. It's a place I really enjoy.
Yeah. Well, tell you mentioned that being one of your early albums to produce. What were a few of your, we'll say, aha moments, as a producer where you realize, like, oh, if I do this, this will work, or that, or what have you?
It's funny. It's not like the skill set. So like as a musician, there's times like I started as a musician when I was playing my soprano saxophone, let's say, and you practice and practice and practice, and then like you play live and you sort of achieve plateau. You could sort of you could see like clear points in your past where you sort of figured something out and got better, and it's only ever work. You just got to keep doing it, keep doing it, keep doing it, keep doing it forever and ever. And then, gradually, micron by micron, you sort of hit a plateau and you get better. And then you sort of ascend in somewhat of a linear fashion. With producing, it's really, it's different because number one, your medium is not yourself. It's other people that you're working with. So it's not just your musical ability or your technical knowledge, but it's so many things. It's your ability to psychoanalyze the people you're working with. It's your ability to kind of hear mistakes before they happen. It's your ability to understand if something is going wrong, like try to get to the bottom of what it actually is. Sometimes it's not very apparent. So it's not the learning process as a producer really has a lot more to do with developing your own sense of right and wrong and trusting your instincts. Like if something, a lot of times these days where I'll be working on something and something is wrong, but you can't really put your finger on it. You have to sort of like, at this point in my life, in my career, like I know instantly if something feels funny, there's something wrong and I have to figure out what it is. And a lot of times it's really mysterious. It could be like a chord, like the way the guitar player is voicing a chord and the keyboard player, like there's a second or something, like there's a second or moment of cloudiness that you want to obscure, you want to get to the bottom of. So a lot of it is just learning how to trust yourself and know that if you feel something, more often than not, it's right. And that, I have to say, took decades of learning that self-reliance. It didn't come easy. I used to think I knew what I was talking about, but I didn't really know what I was talking about. And it took me a really, really long time to learn when to trust myself and when to let the moment just go. That sometimes it's, as I said earlier, sometimes you just need to go with a completely different direction. So it's a fine line between, knowing something's right or wrong or just letting the exploration happen and seeing where it ends up.
Yeah. Well, to travel musically again, you worked with Prairie Oyster in Canada. Then later you worked with Buckwheat Zydeco.
Mm-hmm.
What was that like working with him?
Oh man, he was such a character. He was just a remarkable guy. He was a really, really gifted musician. But he was also, in his world, he was a king. Like, it's the only way I could describe it is like his world, Lafayette, Louisiana, or Maurice, Louisiana, where he was the king of his world. And I guess in a weird way, like kind of role as the same guy, like that they both have effectively kingdoms that they rule and they have subjects. Sometimes it's their band, sometimes it's just the people around them. But Buck was he was a very regal character. He had the air of a king. Like it was just an amazing experience to be around him. He was very, very, very open and friendly, but he was really, really country. Like he was really like not sophisticated in a certain sense. I mean, extremely sophisticated as a musician, but the thing I kind of had to figure out with him was like, number one, he had to learn to trust me, which I think he did. Obviously we did a couple records together. Like he had to learn. I just wasn't I didn't come with an agenda. My agenda was to make the best possible Buckwheat Zydeco record we could. And it meant a lot to me that he would trust me. I mean, that was a big moment for me that, I know he had suspicions. His manager could tell him all day long what a cool guy I was, but, Buck was not going to have that. He had to kind of learn to trust me innately and completely. Because, when you're making a record, if you have suspicions about your producer, it's generally not going to go well. That's never worked in my experience. And I've been on both sides. I've been both the untrustor and the untrustee. So I know exactly what it feels like from both angles. But he was just I don't know, he was just a remarkable guy. He took me to some of the most amazing places down around Lafayette. Like when we were working on the record, he would take me to these clubs in his area that not a whole lot of folks that have my skin pigmentation ever go to. And it was like literally like going into a different world. It was like I had never before since ever seen anything like the clubs down there. It was just an amazing experience. And again, he was full on royalty. He walked in the door, everything stopped to welcome the king. And it was just an amazing experience. But the records were fun. He was open to a lot of interesting ideas. Like we did a Captain Beefheart song. I mean, give me a break. I mean, how many, a guy like Buck doing Captain Beefheart song, that's pretty cool. But it just shows you how open his mind was. Like he just wanted great songs. He knew that I wasn't going to let him down. He knew that I wasn't going to make him sound crappy. It was going to sound great. As a manager, a guy named Ted Fox was integral in that process. Ted was always, had my back, and he was always, really, really, helped Buck, some of these things. Like I remember the first time we played, what record was it? So this was the second record I did with him, and we wanted to do, this was around Katrina, and we wanted to do When the Levee Breaks, the Zepp song. And it was the first day of rehearsals, and we were so we recorded that record at a studio called the Dockside, right by Buck's house in Maurice. Actually, Buck lived in Carencro. I mean, these places, southern Louisiana. So he lived in Carencro. The studio was in Maurice, Louisiana, which is just outside of Lafayette. So first day, first rehearsal, we started playing the Zeppelin song, and he had at the time Buck had two guitar players. There's a guy named Olivier, and then he had a legendary Zydeco guy who called himself Little Buck. Buck Senegal was his name, and I was, he's also like, kind of a made man in the Zydeco world. Legendary guitar player, legendary character. So we start playing the song, and literally we don't even get halfway through the song, and Little Buck gets up, he goes, "Nope." He just goes, "Nope, nope." Nope. And he gets his guitar and he walks out the door. And that was the last time I saw him. So you can see that Buck had an open mind where many of his contemporaries, I don't think, learning and playing a Led Zeppelin song probably wouldn't have gone over great with Clifton Chenier either. But Stanley was, he was all about it, man. He just wanted to make cool records. And, we were lucky enough I won him a Grammy. That was one of Grammys are they're fun. The parties are great. I just won one the Lobos won one. It's always great. But I was so happy that I was able to get Buck a Grammy. I mean, that was the one to me that was like, wow, that is, if nothing else. If I didn't do anything else in my career, I got Buckwheat a Grammy. That was a really, really, like, I was a lot of pride in that moment.
Absolutely. I'll tell you one thing that always struck me with his records was his choice of covers that he would do.
Yeah.
Frequently songs that you would not expect to hear.
Right.
That's what I always liked.
Yep. He was, like I said, he had a really open mind. He was very inquisitive. He really wanted to understand stuff. And he, if he trusted you completely. Like clearly, like me and Ted pitching a Captain Beefheart song is like, he kind of looked at us like, "You want me to do what?" But he was game. He said, "All right, let's do it. Let's figure it out. Let's see if we can make it sound like something." And I had to say, it wasn't like I was going to force it down his throat. If it wasn't going to work, I was perfectly happy to not do it either. Like it wasn't like we had to, or I wasn't going to make him do it. But I was really happy when that song worked out, because I think it's a great song and it did fit him. It's funny. It sounds simple, but it's really complex. But it worked. I think it worked perfectly for him and his band and his voice. So I was really that was very gratifying as well.
Yeah, without a doubt. I'll tell you, to jump back to your sax playing and the records that you played on. One of those was Paul Simon's Graceland. How did you come to work on that album?
Well, that one is, well, I'll get into it. A cautionary tale for you kids out there. We had just put out, Will the Wolf Survive? And we had done quite well. It was the Rolling Stone Record of the Year. It was, it was the record that really kind of broke us really internationally. I mean, it was, went gold. We were on radio stations all over the country. So we were kind of riding high, if you will. We had a relationship with the president of our record label, a guy named Lenny Waronker, that was really special. Like, Lenny loved us. We loved Lenny. Like most people, when you talk to their artists about their record companies, they hate everybody involved. They, because more often than not, their relationships are pretty mercenary, let's say. And more often than not, most of those guys are on the move to their next job all the time. So you rarely develop anything resembling a relationship at all. Usually it's just a marriage of convenience. Certainly I've been in that boat many, many times. And you can't really trust him. You don't really feel like, this guy would turn on you on a dime if, somebody at the label, his boss said he didn't like something, the guy wouldn't fight for you. He just, collapsed like a cheap suit. But our relationship in that era with both Lenny Waronker and his boss, Mo Austin, was really, really good. We loved them. They loved us. We had a lot of support. This was before La Bamba, so it wasn't like we had, we were well thought of, but we hadn't really sold a zillion records for them yet. So it was just, mutual admiration society. So Lenny said, "Hey, Paul Simon's doing this record. Would you guys consider being involved?" Now, important to point out, like, the guys in my band could not give two shits about Paul Simon. They were not fans. They really didn't care about him or his music. But and I did. I mean, I thought he's one of the best songwriters in the world. So I was super excited about the idea of it, especially when Lenny said it. It's at that point the record was Paul Goes Around the World. When we got involved, it was not what turned out to be Graceland. It was like, he had been literally just in South Louisiana with the same people I was just talking about, not Buckwheat necessarily, but with, a lot of the guys in New Orleans. There was a sax player named John Hart. He had done stuff with, a lot of the players that I had just, not at that moment, actually, I went on to work with them, but at that moment, they were just my heroes. I just loved that music. I loved those players. And so Lenny came to us and said, what would you guys do it? And we're like, yeah, what the hell, we'll give it a shot. And I remember I had to sort of talk a few of the guys in my band, like, why are we doing this? Like, well, let's just see what happens. It could be fun. The guy's great. So, we go in the studio, and we had never met before. It was Paul and his engineer, a guy named Roy Haley, who had engineered all the Simon and Garfunkel stuff. And he was a legend unto himself. I mean, Roy Haley is one of the finest engineers in the world. So we're just talking, and Paul's like, he's a little socially awkward. I think, nobody would disagree that he's not like the easiest guy to hang out with or talk to. He's just he's kind of weird. So he played us a few things that he had done. At that point, none of the songs were songs per se, but, they were, I heard, I can't remember the name, the stuff that people are familiar with on the record. But at that point, it wasn't as South Africa centric as it turned out to actually be in the end. So he played us some stuff he had done in Louisiana, but he kept calling it Zydeco music. So he kept saying Zydeco, and like finally I was just like, I got it. I said, Paul, I'm pretty sure they call it Zydeco. Zydeco, Zydeco, not Zydeco. No. Zydeco, yeah. And he's like, yep, got it. Zydeco, not Zydeco. And he's like, I can see, he's like, no, Zydeco. So that was my first flag. So he says, we're like, we assume we're going to play in a song. He goes, well, I don't really have anything worked out. Could we just jam? And I'm like, oh shit, like nobody told us we were going to jam. Because, to be honest with you, at that point, David Hidalgo is one of the finest musicians on earth. And our drummer, Louis Perez, who is, also a fine musician, he basically he played drums on the norteño stuff, which is like the up tempo Mexican stuff that we do, but he was not really. He would be the first to tell you he was no session drummer. Like he didn't play on the rock songs. David would play drums on all the rock stuff that we did, or we would hire somebody to play drums if David needed to play guitar. So when we quote unquote jammed, it would be more often than not, Dave would be playing drums and we'd just be fooling around. So, right away, we're on the proverbial back foot because Louis was like, what the hell am I going to do? Like, I can't jam. Like he doesn't even own a drum kit, to tell you. I mean, just by way of illustration, Louis never owned a drum kit. He's a drummer in Los Lobos. So like they stick him behind this giant set of drums and he's terrified, as we all were, because we thought we were going to play on a song. So we just start noodling around and Paul's not even in the room. He's in the control room with it, he's just watching us like we're animals at the zoo. That was the feeling that I got. He's just like observing us in our natural habitat, which is anything but our natural habitat. And like not an hour into the session, the guys, because they're looking at me like it was my fault that this is happening. They're like, dude, you got to get us out of this. This ain't happening. We got to go. This is not going to work. So I sneak off and I called Lenny. I said, Lenny, this is a disaster. We got to get out of here. You got to call Paul, call Roy. This is not happening. It's not going to work. He's like, no, okay, I know Paul's a little weird, but just hang in there. It's something great. I know something great's going to happen. I'm like, Lenny, you got to get us out of here. And it was just literally torture. He said, no, hang in there, guys. Trust me, it's going to work. Trust me. I was like, nobody else in the world would we have listened to, but Lenny, he wanted us to do it. We're like, oh Christ, all right, so let's see what happens. So and we would we're just like fumbling around. We'd start playing something and it would start to like, oh shit, this sounds like something, and Paul would just go, nope, like on the speakers in the studio, like nope. And again, like he's not in the room, he's not guiding, he's not helping, he's not doing anything. He's just him. You just see like him and Roy in the control room backlit. So you just see these two heads like kind of bobbing around, and like we're just like, what the hell are we doing? So this goes on it felt like weeks, but it went on for a couple hours. And then so finally, at some point, we were just exhausted and there's nothing happening. It was just completely uncomfortable. And David starts playing this riff that we had started working on as one of our songs. It's literally just a riff. And so like we just pick it up. It was like, oh yeah, that thing, like it was just like it was something that we fooled around with in rehearsal. Maybe it was going to be a song, maybe it wasn't. But it's literally just like I forget how it goes, but it was just like this riff that we had started fooling around with. And Paul goes, "Hey, what's that?" And we're like, "Oh, that's one of our songs." He goes, "Oh wait, can we use that? Is that okay?" And we're like, "Anything to get us out of this room, anything to get us out of this room." So we started playing it, and again, he is not in the room. People talk, like there's all this controversy about what actually happened. He was never, not once, ever in the studio with us. He was always in the control room. He never put on a guitar. He never contributed not a single note of music to what we did. This was one of our songs that we had started practicing, that we played just to get the fuck out of the room because we could not stand what was going on. And the guys were literally frothing mad at me because I was the one that pushed at it, and that frankly at Lenny because he wouldn't get us out of there. So we just, we tried to get through the song. Boom. Paul's happy. We ran out of there literally as fast as we could. That was that. Record comes out, Graceland. It's a big deal. We get our copies. It says words and music by Paul Simon. What the hell? We're like, oh, that's just a mistake. We said, all right, hey, Lenny, our manager at the time, this wonderful woman named Linda Clark, who sadly passed away, like, hey, could you just straighten this out? Because, we can see that the record's going to be, it's looking like it's going to be popular. And again, Paul contributed he had as much to do with the music, not the words, but he had as much to do with the music of that song as you did, Michael. So, months go by, records selling millions, no response from Paul, no, hey, what's going on with that song? Like nothing. And then, it's like, 10 million, whatever, how many, zillions of records. He's all over the place still like, hey, did they ever fix that, the song or anything? And the word came from Paul, like, hey, you don't like it, sue me, see what happens. And we go to Lenny, like, Lenny, what the hell's wrong with this guy? Like, you made us do this. You literally locked us in the studio with this idiot. You put us in this situation, and this is how this is going to go down. And Lenny was like, oh, guys, I'll make it up to you. Don't worry. And then, a couple months later, he had gone on to start DreamWorks with Steven Spielberg. And, so that was that. But, we didn't have we didn't have a way of proving that it was our song. I would just submit to the people who think that I'm lying or that I have an agenda. Like, in my entire history of any interview that I've ever done in my entire life, have I ever accused anybody of stealing a song of ours? No, never, because nobody else in the history of Los Lobos has ever stolen one of our songs. Certainly not, that I'm aware of. So he stole one of our songs, and it's like, we chalk it up to. I mean, I'm certainly not obsessed about it. People ask, I'll tell them the truth about what happened. It's, I don't think about it. I regret that it went down that way. I regret that we weren't better protected. Like, we should have had the real takeaway for me is that, when you enter a situation like that, you need to have lawyers involved, because we just did it because Lenny asked us to. We didn't sign anything. We didn't have any protection. We didn't, we had no recourse when Paul said, sue us and see what happens. So all we could do is tell our version of it. Paul said that, he had a lot more to do with it than he did. But, I would just say, you listen to that song, you tell me, does it sound like a Los Lobos song? Does it sound like a Paul Simon song? I mean, it's clearly one of our riffs. It sounds just like 19 other songs that we did in that era. I mean, the reason why it wasn't on our record, because it wasn't good enough. But I guess it was good enough for Paul. So.
Well, there you go. Yeah, your cast-offs are Paul Simon diamonds.
But what I tell people is that you can't have a career like next year will be 50 years for us. You can't have a 50-year career without stuff like that happening. You have ups, you have downs, you have good days, you have bad days. You meet people that are ethical and upright. You meet people who are lying jerks like Paul. So it's a life's rich pageant. But we don't we don't care. It just happens.
Long time ago now.
Yeah.
Well, tell me this, Steve, on the opposite end of it, what's a session that you played on that was just an absolute joy?
Oh man, I've had so many of those. It's hard to. Or
quantify. A few.
Wow. Well, it's funny. Like the ones that I've had like really, I've gotten to be like literally like front row seat for so many amazing musical moments. It's really hard to quantify, but the ones that a lot of the records that never sold or people never heard are some of my favorites, just because they were so it's sort of like I can only imagine, like, thank God my children were all healthy, but they were like kind of like fragile at birth, and what's a medical word for it, like like these little kind of these things that you're trying to create out of nothing, and they're barely able to stand on their own two legs, and they wobble and fall down, but somehow or another a cool record comes out of it. So I don't know, those I like the ones that are no one's heard them. I just they were fun experiences to me, just because a lot of times you didn't really think they were going to make it, and they do, and record comes out. So I don't know, those are the ones that, when you ask like memorable experiences, like it's not as much about like the the stuff like the Raul Malo record, which are literally like a nonstop party, which was amazing, and the Super 7 records, which are great, and those were all just really powerful experiences. But like I like because I really like this job, I really like what I do, the ones where I really had to sweat and pull stuff out of people and kind of make them believe in themselves, those are the ones that kind of stick out to me, and as more memorable than stuff that I'm probably better known for. So like, for instance, there's a record I did with Rick Trevino back in that year, like right before I did Raul's record, called Me Song. So that was Rick. So Rick Trevino is a really interesting guy. He was a country star of Mexican or Chicano descent, but he never really his presentation at that era was more like, he was one of those like white hat pressed jeans country guys, very clean cut, straight up country music, which honestly I didn't really have much interest in. If you want to make country records, I'm probably not your guy. But he, when we were doing the Super 7 record, the second one in particular, he kind of like a light went on in his head, like, this is my heritage. I need to explore this. So with the same exact band, with the same band that played on Raul's record and on the largely the same band that played on the Super 7 record, we did a record called Mi Son, which is Rick kind of examining and playing the Latin side of his music. And what was so cool about it is that, Rick is Chicano by birth, but the band was Peruvian and Cuban. So it has this really, really cool and weird texture. And that was when we were, in the Lobos world, I'd been working with Mitchell Froome and Chad Blake. So we had done Kiko and Colossal Hit. So I was, those records were really, really experimental. And, we tried to create sounds that had never existed before. So I kind of took that approach with that band, and the cleanest cut, the guy that never cursed in his entire life, and made this really greasy, grimy, this bizarre mashup of all these Latin cultures records with him. And, like the people that have heard the record that love it, for most part, it certainly went over every Latin, it's not, it was more like I don't know, it was way ahead of its time in a lot of respects, but that's one that stands out. I'm excited about the records I'm doing now, to be honest with you. I mean, like the minute I finish one, I'm on to the next one. It's hard. I don't really look back all that often. So like, I'm really, this record I'm doing now, this guy named Alex Jordan, I'm excited about. Another record I'm doing with a band here. I'm in Austin right now. I'm doing a record with a band called Shiny Ribs that I'm really excited about. I did a record with John Doe from X, a new solo record that's just about to come out. That was super fun. But I'm a working producer. I'm always thinking about the next one and the stuff I'm working on. But I've been blessed. You asked a question, I should have a ready answer, but I've just been blessed to work with some of the best musicians on earth, and I've had a front row seat at a lot of really, really cool stuff.
What was it like working with John Lee Hooker?
Oh man, that was so fun. John, literally a living legend. So we got asked to do that, and and of course the answer was yes. His manager at the time was our booking agent, so we had a connection. So it was a record called The Healer, which was John collaborating with a lot of different people. So we got asked to do it, and I was thinking, like, what would be a weird, like, what could we do that would be fun and different? So I was still am a huge fan of the Beastie Boys, and this was right around Paul's Boutique, if I'm not wrong. I think it was like in that era. So the Beastie Boys were they were kind of finding their voice, and their engineer was a guy named Mario Caldado, and I thought those records sounded unbelievable. I thought, God, this would be fun. I wonder if we can get Mario Caldado to engineer this John Lee Hooker thing. That'd be kind of crazy. So, made a few phone calls, and he said yes. And Mario's an amazing guy. I mean, he's an incredible engineer, really, really experimental. And so my pitch to him was like, dude, I know you sampled this guy's records. Wouldn't it be fun to actually capture him live? Think about how fun that would be. And he was really nervous. Like he didn't know us. He didn't know me. Like I'd never met him before. And he walks in the room, and it's like Los Lobos, John Lee Hooker, and Carlos Santana was also on the session. So he's like scared out of his mind. I said, man, just do what you do, man. Like, you don't have to, you're not here to impress anybody. Just do it the way you would do anybody, do Beasties records. You don't change anything. Just do your thing. So, he was understandably nervous, but it sounded great. The vibe was great. Carlos was, he was really funny, and he made everybody feel very, it's kind of weird, like being in a room with those two guys, but everybody got along great. Hooker was in a really, playful mood, so he was keeping everybody light, and it came out great. But I just remember at some point, like Mario looked at me and goes, "Man, can I put some of this on my SP?" In that era, like all those records were made on this Akai sampler called SP 1200. Legendary device that's sort of like how rap records were sort of fashioned, where you could put a sample on. There's had like 16 pads, and you sort of put a sample on each pad. And he goes, "Look, this is what I do. I need to put this on an SP 1200 to feel good." I said, "Do whatever you just do it, man." So he put all the sounds. I'm not sure how much the SP 1200 ended up being on the actual record, but I just remember him like, I just don't feel right unless I have one near me. He's like, "Just do it. It's all right. It's okay." So it was pretty cool. But that was super a lot of fun. Again, won a Grammy on that one. That was pretty, it was just really gratifying. It's really gratifying to work with heroes, legends, and to have good things happen to them as a result of our participation. That is really, really, really gratifying on every level.
What were a few of the times where you're, working on a project, whether you're, as a player or a producer, where you thought to yourself, man, I can't believe I'm here, in this room with these folks?
every one of them. Well, there's a couple of those that I remember, like the first Oza Motley record that I did. That was one where I was pretty scared because I just had the highest respect for them, and I didn't know if I was the right guy for that job. Like they hired me, and I kind of like, that was in like early days, so they had Charlie Tuna in the band at that point. It was sort of like a world, that, I mean, I knew what I knew, but I wasn't really, I had never made records like what I, turned out to be, right in my wheelhouse. But I remember driving to that session, like having my heart was like kind of beating out of like my chest a little bit. And I was really, I felt that was one where I remember just being really scared walking in and feeling really good about it walking out. Certainly that one. The Tragically Hip records, I think, those were ones were like, they weren't really scary, but, when you work with bands that have had huge success and like I knew that they had to change, that they more often than not, when people hire me, it's not to keep doing what they've been doing. Like, when I get hired, it's more of, it's usually people want to take a different tack. Like they want to try something they haven't tried. So that one was, I mean, they were absolute wonderful humans and great gentlemen, but this is a band much like my band. They had been together for 20 years, had sold, not necessarily zillions of records in America, but they had certainly, they played stadiums in Canada. We had just done a tour with them where we traversed the entire country. It was us, Wilco, and Sheryl Crow, and them headlining. It was an amazing tour. So I'd seen them play a number of times, and I had, what they do live. They were, on a good night, they were one of the best bands of the world, bar none. But in the studio, so they had a studio that they owned that was really more or less like their boys' club. It was like half an hour from where they all lived in Kingston, Ontario, in Canada. And this was sort of like their clubhouse. So it had like a pool table and it had like a little, like their bar, and it was definitely like their cave, if you will. And they all had their spots. Like Robbie had his guitar in it here, and Robbie, Paul had his here, and I kind of, this is sort of getting back to one of your earlier questions. Like it would have been very, very, very easy for me to just sort of like blend into the scenery, not shake things up, and just let them do what they're going to do. But I mean, maybe I was stupid or whatever, but I just figured that if I'm here, I'm going to do it my way. So I instantly made them move. Like it was just moving them to different parts of the studio was a huge deal. Like getting them to not be in their corners. And then they played these horrible Mesa Boogie amps. I just hate Mesa Boogie amps. Like everybody played Mesa Boogies back then. Like Carlos, Mesa Boogie, everybody played Mesa Boogies, and they just sounded thin and spindly, and they just had they just didn't sound authoritative to me. I'd never heard a good one, so I made them get rid of their Mesa Boogies. And again, like I'm just like, I walk in as American who didn't, what did I know? And first day, and I wasn't dogmatic about it. I was gentle with them. I just said, well, can we just see what happens if we plug in this priceless vintage Fender Twin instead of this piece of crap, Mesa Boogie, and maybe you guys could play two different guitars instead of the same guitar with the same pickups and the same settings, and maybe you could move to this part of the room instead of that part of the room, so you're not, and it's just sort of like that. Again, did I know what I was doing? No. Did I have a real plan? No. I just knew that if I was going to get what I wanted out of it, they were going to have to get out of their comfort zone, and they're going to have to try some new stuff. And, maybe I was going to get fired, and, maybe it wasn't going to work out, but if nothing else, they were going to have to do the work. I wasn't going to let them just sort of skate and get away with what they had gotten away with for a long time, which, again, like, who am I to say? Like, they had, their records were great, and it was really working. But, like I said, I just figured that if they hired me, they probably didn't want to do it the same way they had done it with the last, they had done 3 records with the same engineer. And I don't know if there was even, probably the same producer. I wasn't even, to be honest with you, I didn't really, I listened to what they had done prior, but I kind of felt like, well, if I spent too much time listening to this stuff, I'm going to end up using the same tricks. So I thought I'd better start from scratch.
Yeah, absolutely. Keep it fresh.
Yep. And I ended up doing 2 records with them, and it was, I just talked to him actually a couple of weeks ago, to the guys that, I don't know if you know the story, but their singer had an incurable brain disease, and rather than give in to it, he decided that he was going to go out as a hero. It's going to break me up again. So they did a final tour.
No worries.
It was one of the bravest things I ever saw. I mean, the guy's like, he's literally losing his mind, but he was going to go out on his terms. And it was just overwhelming. So anyway, it was really emotional for the whole country and for me, but quite a guy.
Yeah, without a doubt. Well, tell you what, Steve, I know you've got to get back into the studio, start recording there. So I don't want to be the one that holds up Alex's record by any means.
No, we're good. Yeah. He's not, it's a pretty cool studio. It's a place called the Finishing School. There's that house. It's owned by a band called the Band of Heathens. I don't know if you heard of those guys, but fantastic band. So this is their studio, and there's they have a great studio in a house, and then the house next door is where the artists generally and me, when I work here, stay. So Alex isn't even up yet, so I think we're okay. We got a couple more minutes if you want to go on a little bit, but it's been fun. It's kind of nice going down memory lane with you. I appreciate you did your homework, obviously. I feel like I didn't really talk about Los Lobos very much, but I guess our history's out there.
Well, you know what, Steve? I mean, you've done so many things and worked on so many albums I personally have enjoyed. So
thank you.
Knowing that we're working within that hour time frame, roughly, you got to kind of go through and pick and choose which ones you think. Because otherwise, I'd probably be talking for 6 hours or so going through everything. So
happy to do it, man. I appreciate it, but it's been fun. Thanks so much. I enjoyed it.
All right. Sounds good. Well, tell you what, everybody, on that note, we'll wrap this one up. I want to thank everybody for watching. Steve, again, thank you for being here.
My pleasure, man. Thank you.
Everybody, have a good night.
This has been Music Night at the Majestic with Michael Boswell. If you enjoyed this edition of Music Night at the Majestic, follow us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, and at musicnight.net. Music Night at the Majestic is a copyright production of Starliner Media. Any use of the accounts and descriptions of this program, its audio or visual content, without the express written consent of Starliner Media is prohibited. Thank you for joining us this evening. We'll see you next time for Music Night at the Majestic. This is your announcer speaking. Starliner Media.